Welcome back to the Stepfamily Saturday Series with your Stepfamily Guides. We are here to lead you through the everyday challenges of your stepfamily life. With me today are fellow Stepfamily Guides, Amelia and Amy. Today, we're going to dive into answering as many of the most commonly questions that we receive from clients as stepfamily coaches about keeping the kids out of the middle. There are so many different points to talk about with this one. And it is a hot topic that can bring up so many emotions and having people kind of all over the place. There's a large spectrum with this one. So I know one of the first things that we hear about often is children being used as a pawn in the game or, in the power struggles and them being put in the middle in that way. So why don't we start with that? How to keep kids out of that middle and not be a pawn in the game.
Well, I'll jump in. And this is something that I've dealt with a lot with my clients. I typically work with the step couples, and I hear things like, she's always late in bringing the kids back. It's those, it's a half hour. She's purposely half hour late. Things like that just, you almost feel like it's a knife that they're sticking in and twisting just a little bit. So, and I feel with parents that we need to remember that these kids are not pawns in a power play. They're really not. They're little human beings who are watching your behavior. They're watching how all of their adults, now mind you, these kids didn't ask for marriages, they didn't ask for divorces, they didn't ask for step families either. So they're just kind of dragged in the mud while you all are fighting and having arguments, and they're the ones that are suffering the biggest cost of all of this. So we need to kind of take a step back and go, okay, why am I doing what I'm doing? Am I doing this, just to be mean and spiteful? We got to think about the purposes behind our decisions, because the kids are watching and they're learning interactive relationships from us. So sometimes we need to step back and think about, what is my motive when I'm making these choices?
I think that's the most powerful piece of this all, is if we can each own our choices and actions and words and really look in a mirror and question, why are we doing what we're doing? I think we'd be living in a very different world, even within blended and step families. I think that we would very quickly change some of our choices. Even those of us that have the best of intents at times, I think if we really get honest with ourselves, there are things that we could do differently or say differently to not continue to contribute to that power game that happens.
Yeah, it goes back to that saying, hurt people, right? So taking a look at yourself and figuring out what's going on within yourself and healing those wounds so that you can be the healthy parent that you need to be for your child. And yeah, I think that's a big one.
Yeah, let's take a specific example, things like gift giving. There can be differences in households, income differences, belief differences of what kids should or shouldn't have, especially in the technology age that we live in. So, how do blended and step families navigate gift giving rules, if you will, or guidelines? Should that be a conversation if there's healthy relationships, or should it always be more of that parallel parenting where it's like, you do what you feel is right in your house and we're going to do what we feel is right in our house? Again, I imagine there's really a spectrum here, but let's talk about gift giving and not one-upping each other.
Well, that's just it, right? The one-upping. So when you're gift giving, and we have talked about this in our holiday survival guide, ensuring that, you're not buying something to try and one-up the other household, that your reasons for giving are genuine, because otherwise, it's not a competition, and it's not about who spends the most money on something. And to your point about, should we have those conversations with the other parent, say about a new phone? It's funny that we're talking about this, because I thought about this with my own situation a few years ago when we gave our daughters our old phones when we upgraded. And it wasn't a conversation that we had with my stepdaughter's mom. And me now looking at it, I think back to, I wish we would have had that conversation, because I think it's an important one. I mean, having a phone really opens up a whole new world for a child. And one that, both parents or all parents need to kind of be aware of and have conversations around in both the homes about, safety around using the phone and whatnot. So personally for me, I think if you can have those conversations, I definitely think you should. But again, if you're in that really toxic, relationship with an ex, and it's not possible to have a conversation, then I guess, maybe you have to resort to parallel parenting and, you do you in your own home. So I think it's, each individual circumstance is going to have to look at their own situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think, co-parenting versus parallel parenting, I don't think one has to be better or worse than the other. I think it can ebb and flow as your relationship ebbs and flows and changes over time. And that's the most healthy situation, because if you can't co-parent well, then that's more detrimental than to say, you know what, we need to parallel parent right now and get things sorted out until we can get our co-parenting relationship back on track. And I think that applies to anything, whether we're talking about gifts or electronics or anything else. So that takes us to a very common concern that we hear is not putting the kids in the middle to be the messenger or resolve the adult issues. And this can get really tricky because things can get said in each home. And even if it's not intended for the kids to hear, sometimes they do hear, or sometimes it is intentional. And then the kids go back and forth sharing information that can be misconstrued or come from a different lens because the child doesn't have the brain development or the context of the adult conversations. So let's talk through that. How do we keep the kids out of the middle of relaying information back and forth and not hearing negative talk about the parents in the other home?
Oh, I think those are almost two different points. And there's a lot of technology now that through that step families can use for messaging back and forth and things like that that you don't have to include the kids. This isn't the Fred Flintstone days where you had to, chisel out a rock to get a message to somebody. And there's no reason for kids to have those conversations like, well, mom said that you owe her $100 for the soccer lessons or whatever. So because first of all, no one under the age of 18 should be handling any of that anyway. But the kids have no power or control over any of that. So using your kids as a messenger, it just makes things worse, I think, because like you said, kids could twist it around a little bit, or they could add a little intonation that they didn't mean to, or they might have sensed that mom was mad that day. And maybe mom was mad because she burned, breakfast that morning and everybody was in a rush. And she might have said, hey, tell dad, ... But she was in such a mood because, everything got screwed up that morning that it came off kind of short. So then the child thinks, oh, mom's mad at dad, so I need to convey that emotion in it, so it just, if we can pull the kids out of it and let them be kids, because they're only kids for a short amount of time. So let them be kids, and the adults, if you can't have a conversation, you can text it to each other,
or email
it to each other. Yes.
Or like you said, there's those tools through the court systems that if it's really that bad, maybe you need one of those tools where it monitors the language and the communication and helps you navigate some of those more challenging conversations. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing wrong with that needing to be implemented. If it makes the situation better for everybody, especially the children, then let's implement it.
Definitely.
Yeah, and just for reference for anyone that does want to know, there's Talking Parents is one, and My Family Wizard is another. I do believe there is a Canadian-based one, but I'd have to look it up. Yeah, but they are handy tools. I actually have a client that uses one, and it works really well for that situation because they aren't able to communicate at all. So they do use that, and it does do wonders for them. They use My Family Wizard. So
thank you. I'm glad you mentioned those. I think it's important for our listeners to have those resources to look up if they're needed.
mm-hmm.
So I think, all of this leads to the potential for loyalty binds, and or loyalty binds could exist and add strain to these types of conversations and the kids being put in the middle. So I think it's important to talk about loyalty binds in the context of the kids not being put in the middle and not having to choose a side, and having the permission to love both parents, spend time with both parents, and enjoy their family, even if it is in two different homes. So let's talk about how we help people navigate loyalty binds if they exist, and how we help prevent them, so that they don't exist in more and more homes.
Yeah, I wrote about this earlier this week on my personal page, was just giving kids permission to speak openly about their feelings surrounding divorce or separation, and not putting them in a place where they're going to feel guilty for feeling one way or the other towards a parent or a step parent, because they're not the ones that got divorced from their parent, right? And they love their parents, and they maybe love their step parents, and that's all okay. And maybe they're upset with a parent or a step parent, and that's okay. But we need to create these spaces for these kids to be able to talk about these things. And just like I wrote in that post was, if we can create space for them when they're little to talk about these things, we're creating space for them down the road to be able to open up about the bigger things as well, because we all know the bigger things come along too. But I think, yeah, just allowing them to communicate openly without worrying about being judged or hurting someone's feelings is a really big one around loyalty binds, I think.
There's the other piece of that too, that if you're concerned that your son or daughter is building a relationship with their step parent, you might find that as a threat to your own relationship with your child, when really it's not. It's a bonus. It's one more adult who cares about your kiddo. It's one more adult who's navigating that parental role in the other house while you're not there to handle that role. So, and then to make a child feel bad because they care about that other adult who cares about them, what is that doing to your kids? It puts them in the middle of everything. And then that's in a number of my clients have then said, my kids are lying a lot. We hear one story here and then the other story, the house is here and this story and that. Well, yeah, because you're all sticking this kid in the middle and telling them you can't like this person, and I don't want to hear about what you did with that person. And when you're 8, how do you navigate that? Like, you're trying to figure out what you want to eat for dinner or for breakfast, how am I supposed to navigate all of your adult issues in conversation? So, I'm reading this really great book. It's called In Their Shoes. And we really need to, as adults, put ourselves in their shoes. And, think about when they're 8, they can't figure out how to do all of this stuff. They just can't. So, how do we help them instead of putting them, instead of saying, I don't want to hear what you did with your stepmom? If nothing else, ask those questions. What happened? Did you guys have fun? What'd you do? What'd you eat for dinner that night? Open those lines of communication, like Amelia said, for the little things, and then they'll come to you for the big things if they need to. But it's more adults that care about your kiddo. And I know it's hard, especially if there's a high conflict, relationship. You don't want to think about that other person being on this kid's team, but they're in their life. So we got to figure out how to navigate that well.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I'm certainly not saying that, it's easy to sit there as a parent or a step parent and have your child say, you know what, I am upset that my parents are divorced, or I wish that you guys were together, or in having the step parents. Like, I'm not saying that that's easy and that's what I want to hear, but we need to allow our kids to do that because they shouldn't have to carry around that weight.
Right.
I think it's really unfair to expect that of them. And the other thing I wanted to add to that too was, as women, just, from what society teaches us about competing with one another just as women, right? Like, you're a better mom and you're a better, you're a better wife and whatever. And so then, you've got a mom and a stepmom and a bio mom. That just adds this whole other level of like competition, right? And bio mom maybe thinking she's trying to one up me, and do you know what I mean? And
Absolutely.
then, trying to reel their kid back in because, well, I don't want her to like her more. Like, look at her, she's over there making muffins all the time and doing all the Pinterest crafts, and well, I'm over here with my Betty Crocker mix and I can't, so like there's just that whole competitive side where, yeah, you don't want your child to think stepmom's better because that's what society's taught you, right? Like we've literally grown up trying to compete with one another as women, as moms, as wives, as daughters, So
Absolutely.
yeah, I think taking a hard look at that kind of your views around that as well.
Yeah, I think when you can remove the competition and focus on community, I say it all the time and I remind myself of it all the time, it's community over competition. It does take a village to raise children. It takes a village, even in nuclear families. And we don't view the people that help us in those situations as competition. So why all of a sudden do we switch to that when we're in a step or blended family? And I think it goes back to healing those wounds within ourselves, doing the work on ourselves and wanting to be the best person that we can be for our children, so that they aren't put in the middle. Amy, you look like you had something to add.
No, you're good.
Wonderful. All right. Well, I know there is a lot in here and we could probably spend hours upon hours unpacking each one of these into greater detail. And we will have future Stepfamily Saturday conversations around each of these topics. So we appreciate you joining us today, and we hope that you have had something that's a key takeaway for you and been helpful for you in your situations. If you do have topics or questions that you would love to hear us talk about or share insights, tips, strategies on, or answer, please feel free to reach out. You can connect with us through social media on Facebook and Instagram at Stepfamily Guides, or you can connect with us through our website at stepfamilyguides.com. And we hope that you have a wonderful Saturday.